And welcome, you're watching I24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. An Israeli soldier killed during an attempted terrorist infiltration from Rafah, as the IDF says it killed dozens of terrorists in a precise strike on a former UNRWA school in Gaza. We are ready to go to war with Hezbollah. The head of the IDF's Northern Command says the army is prepared to restore security in the north. And like Ali Baba and the 40 thieves, that's reportedly what the foreign minister of the UAE shouted at members of the Palestinian Authority during a recent meeting in Riyadh. First, an IDF soldier was killed today during an attempt by Hamas terrorists to infiltrate Israel from Rafah. This as the IDF says it eliminated dozens of terrorists in a strike on a former UNRWA school. Hamas claims those killed were civilians. More in this report from our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran.
8 months after its October onslaught that sparked the war in Gaza, Hamas continues with its attempts to infiltrate Israel. The IDF said its forces shot and killed 3 militants who entered the Israeli-controlled buffer zone near the Israel-Gaza border under the cover of heavy fog early Thursday morning and opened fire at the forces. The army said 34-year-old officer Ziad Mazarib of the Bedouin Tracking Unit was killed in a firefight. Based on the equipment found in the possession of the killed terrorists, they were planning to raid a nearby military base or civilian community. Inside Gaza, the Hamas-controlled health ministry says over 40 people were killed in an Israeli strike on an UNRWA school in the Nuseirat refugee camp.
We were sleeping when we suddenly saw a rocket falling on us. On the second floor, there were martyrs. On the first, there were injured.
The IDF says 20 to 30 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists were hiding inside the UN school in central Gaza, and that the school was struck only after taking a number of steps to reduce risk to uninvolved civilians.
A few days ago, we completed our mission in Jabalia. After eliminating many enemies in terror infrastructure, in addition to returning the bodies of 3 hostages for burial in Israel, we are currently going on the offensive in El Buraj camp area. We will destroy the enemy, strike its infrastructure, and do everything possible to bring back the hostages.
Meanwhile, Hamas reportedly rejected the Israeli proposal for a hostage and ceasefire deal, claiming it was fundamentally different from the outline laid out by US President Joe Biden last week. Saudi channel Asharq News, citing a Hamas memo sent to representatives of Palestinian factions, reported that Hamas requested clarifications from the mediators. Despite the latest negative indications from Hamas, it has yet to deliver its official response.
Well, to discuss, I'm joined in the studio this hour by Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute, the Jewish News Syndicate and the Alma Centre. Good evening to you, Yaakov. And joining us tonight from the UK, Andrew Fox is a former British soldier and a defence and disinformation research fellow. Thank you for being with us, Andrew, as well. Yaakov, let's start then with the attempted infiltration today from Rafah, which resulted tragically in the death of an IDF soldier. How did this happen? Because we were told by President Biden not long ago that Hamas was no longer a threat.
Right, and this is after the Biden administration was actually saying how ineffective the IDF operation was, so they're kind of swinging back and forth in their assessment. But in terms of the recent event, look, I think that Hamas wanted to send a signal that it's able to continue cross-border infiltrations. It failed in that attempt because the IDF has a good intelligence grip on the area now, and it has the ability to respond in real time to that intelligence. So this is a cell that tried to infiltrate southern Israel to conduct an attack, but the fact that it actually failed in its mission and that most of the cell members were killed through tank fire and a UAV strike is an indication of the fact that the IDF presence there is rendering those cross-border capabilities largely ineffective, but the threat is persistent. They're going to keep trying, I think, to send cells through, and the IDF will be there to stop them in the foreseeable future. Okay, Andrew, of course, the world's media is headlining on the strike on the former UNRWA school. Israel says dozens of terrorists were using it as a base. This is all a bit like deja vu, isn't it, from the strike on the 2 terrorists who were killed last week?
It is. It's the same old pattern we see, that Hamas are first to get the propaganda out, and international news and various famous social media people will spread it straight away without checking. I think the IDF were quicker today on their response. People like Peter Lerner pushed out the official rebuttal within minutes. And I think the subsequent imagery that's been released of the school show just how precise and how accurate that strike was. There's no confirmation of who the casualties were at this stage, or who the Hamas fighters were, clearly. But everything I'm seeing at the moment is following that traditional pattern of Hamas allege an atrocity, the world's media runs with it, and then shortly afterwards, the true facts come out, and it's nowhere near as terrible as made out.
Okay, Yaakov, do you think the IDF handled this event better compared with last week?
I do think so. I think that they did respond quicker. I also think that they were less on the back foot because they did target dozens of terrorists who were hiding in that UNRWA school. So the IDF was confident that it struck the target that it intended to strike. So I think the two incidents are separate in their circumstances, and the IDF was able to more quickly relay the information that it had about who it hit and why. And they were, according to the intelligence, planning attacks as they were targeted in that compound.
Andrew, how can Israel stay out of the trap that's been laid for it by Hamas, which is seeking maximum civilian casualties, and the kind of headlines and images that pressure the IDF from going ahead, advancing and finishing the job?
I mean, this is Hamas's strategy, and it has been from day one. There were claims of genocide before Israel had even fired a shot. I think there's got to be a degree of acceptance that there is a network out there of people who will push Hamas's narrative, whatever happens. Al Jazeera, certain high-profile, bloggers and people on X, who we know now from the press TV leaks are paid by Iran to do exactly that, and they have millions of followers. So there's certain things you can't do about it. I think the only thing to do is what they've done today: be as quick as they can with the rebuttal. Follow that up with evidence to prove what they're saying, because obviously people aren't just going to take them at face value, and accept that some people are simply not going to be persuaded by this argument. But most importantly, make sure that the Western politicians who are responsible, so the White House particularly, make sure that they understand what the truth of what has happened, so that they maintain their support for Israel and what the IDF are doing as they go to complete the Rafah operation.
And Yaakov, on that note, I mean, we've got all of this international pressure on Israel to halt the operation in Gaza. How close is the IDF to defeating Hamas, in your view?
It depends on how we define the word defeat. If we take that word to mean dismantling Hamas's organized terror battalions and brigades, I think that the IDF is not far from that. Once the Rafah operation is complete, which is a matter of weeks, not more, once the Philadelphia corridor is secured, it's already under IDF control. I think the IDF will largely start entering a kind of mopping up stage. They call it stage 3, smaller targeted raids. But I think it's going to be critical to immediately find solutions to areas that the IDF has already taken. What will happen to those areas? What kind of administration will be in those areas? Because if the IDF again leaves those areas, it will again take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and Hamas will fill that vacuum immediately. So that was a mistake that was made, and I think it's critical that Israel doesn't repeat that mistake going forward.
And Andrew, just on the media angle, because you are there in the UK, I'm just wondering, when you turn on the TV news in the UK at night, is it still blanket coverage of what's happening in Gaza? And has Israel done enough, do you think, to get its side across? Of course, October 7th feels like a very long time ago for many people, not people here in Israel, but around the world. Do you think that Hamas is managing to dominate the media narrative?
I think the issue we have is that Hamas's statements are given parity to those of the IDF, which is deeply concerning to me. It's not blanket coverage on the news in the sense that it's reported on every day, but when there are events like today, like the strike that was just outside the humanitarian zone a couple of weeks ago, those headlines do tend to reach the news. And unfortunately, Hamas's statements are given equal weight to the IDF. So it's a case that Hamas say this, IDF say this, and they leave people to make up their own minds. I do have an issue with that on a moral basis, taking a genocidal terror group's word as equal with the armed forces of a democratic ally. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the news business that we're operating in at the moment over here in the UK.
Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Fox, former British soldier and disinformation research fellow. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Yaakov, you're staying with us for a bit longer. Thank you as well. OK, there are growing signs that Israel is preparing for a major operation in the north amid an escalation in attacks by the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. Let's take a listen to the chief of the IDF's Northern Command, Major General Ori Gordin, who spoke at a ceremony to mark 18 years since the Second Lebanese War. Take a listen.
Hezbollah has suffered severe blows. About 420 terrorists and senior operatives were eliminated. Its terror infrastructure, built over the years, has been destroyed and is attacked daily. We have been doing this for 8 months, with the understanding that this time too, like 18 years ago, we have no choice but to continue fighting, together, until the mission is completed. Also, over the past week, we completed preparations for an attack in the north. I meet with the troops and commanders. They're training and determined. I'm sure they'll be able to face any task against the Hezbollah terror organization. We are prepared and ready. And when we receive order, the enemy will meet an army that is strong and ready.
And Major General Gordin speaking a day after an IDF reservist was killed and several civilians wounded in a strike on the Druze majority town of Horfesh in the north. Let's go to the north of Israel now. Our correspondent Zach Anders joins us. Zach, what's the latest?
Yeah, well, Laura, you just heard those comments there, and a bit declarative this time, saying that plans have been finalized. I had a message sent to me by one of the residents in the north, a social media post that I went back and confirmed the dates that I thought was remarkable. Of course, something that has been widely discussed up here is these comments that have been made by the Israeli government and the Israeli military apparatus that there is some change here to come. Back on January 5th, Gallant said, quote, "We are approaching the point where the hourglass will reverse." Back on March 5th, Gallant, "We are approaching the decision point." Gantz on April 21st, "We are approaching the decision point." And then the chief of staff today saying we are approaching the point where decision will be made. This, of course, different than the comments made today by Uri Gordon, the commander here of Major General Uri Gordon, the commander of the Northern Command. But again, it's just remarkable to know for these residents, some 60,000 that remain evacuated, who have been put into this really impossible situation for months now, to continue to be left in the lurch, to not know what is coming next, and to still know that the threat is so prevalent and so dangerous that 2 miles worth of Israeli airspace can be violated by these Hezbollah drones and capable of striking targets, and should pay very close attention here to the how did Hezbollah know where to hit, that this gathering was going to be taking place, or that this many soldiers would be in the same area, and to have that kind of intelligence to hit with likely with these camera feeds that they have equipped on the drones to be able to see the live feed. But still remarkable to know that they were able to achieve this feat. The Iron Dome unable to intercept for over 2 miles, or just under 2 miles rather, of Israeli airspace.
Terrifying stuff. Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there. Well, staying in the north of Israel, we're joined by Major Shadi Halul, Hezbollah expert, former security zone officer for South Lebanon, and the founder and president of the Galilee Aramaic Center. Great to see you, Shadi. Thank you for joining us. So is this just a lot of hot air and talk from the politicians and the generals, or are we really gearing up for a major war with Hezbollah?
Yes, Laura. Well, good evening, and I hope, like you, that the Israeli decision makers and the government of Israel, together with IDF chief of staff, will take the right decision based on analyzing the reality in the north as it is. And the reality, and I should explain it in very short sentence, it is either we exist or they exist. That's the scenario here in the north. It is one front Iran, from Lebanon all the way to Iran. It is Syria, it is Iraq, it is Iran, and it is Lebanon. So Hezbollah is the strongest proxy, operating from Syria as well and operating from Lebanon. And in the next war, we should be aware that they all will be involved. It would be a regional big war, and we should be strong enough to take the right decision with the right vision for us and for Lebanon after this war ends. We don't want to sacrifice our soldiers only for just making another illusional 1701 decision that doesn't function. We were there, we should have...
What is the right decision? Shadi, what is the right decision?
The right decision is making the right, first of example, analyzation of the region. If this now, 2 years, or let's say make an agreement with Hezbollah that will allow them again to play the games of 1701s as it was until October 8th, then we lost the war, and it's not worth going and sacrifice any of our soldiers in Lebanon. But if we go to war, we should know that, and Hezbollah should know that after this war, they will not exist. They will not be able to rule Lebanon. Lebanon should come with other functional government and regime, which is maybe federal government and federations that will be operated with international community and involvement of Israel. If Israel don't want to involve in the regional countries, then they will find Iran controlling Lebanon and functioning in our borders, and this is existential threat that will allow them in 2 years to destroy Israel, or 2 years or 3 years, with more sophisticated weapon, more sophisticated plan, and that's very dangerous existential.
All right, thank you, Shadi.
Stay
with us, Shadi. Thank you. Yaakov, do you agree with that?
I think that Shadi has really, put his finger on something that's critical, and that is that we have to ask ourselves now, before a war potentially breaks out, what is the goal of a future war? Is it to go back to where we are now, or is it to fundamentally transform the security situation in southern Lebanon and northern Israel? I think that's a very important discussion. Now is the right time to have that discussion. What's the long-term strategic goal of Israel? Because as Shadi said, and I agree with him here, if we go to war and lose soldiers tragically, and then only to just sort of come back and restart the clock, what's the point?
Prime Minister Netanyahu has just said that despite the international pressure, Israel will change the pre-October 7th reality. Shadi, can Israel do that, though? Can Israel fight on two fronts? Isn't this Iran's plan for Israel to get bogged down in Gaza and in southern Lebanon?
Laura, we can fight in more than two fronts, and we should do it as soon as possible. Because if we miss this opportunity, we will not have this opportunity again to destroy the main force of Iran in this region. And we should do it with knowing what we want next for Lebanon, because we can do it. And we should do it not now, but before maybe 5 months ago, or 4 months ago, or 3 months ago. I know that we have some limitations by the American administration. I know that the international community is not really happy with having another front. We should ask ourselves what is good for Israel. That's the main thing that our decision makers should do. I know we might have damage in our communities. We might have a huge damage in the north, and also sacrificing a lot of soldiers. But if we want to live in this region, we need to know as a society how to sacrifice for a right cause, that we need to define it as we discussed before. From now, we need to define what we want Lebanon to look like after this war, and how we want the borders to look like after this war.
Okay, real quick, Yaakov, I mean, if Israel was to go to war with Hezbollah now, go into Lebanon, presumably, there's no element of surprise. It's completely predictable. Doesn't that put Israel at a disadvantage?
It puts both sides at a disadvantage. Neither side here has an element of surprise. That's absolutely true. I think that's one of the reasons why Hezbollah has actually refrained from going past a certain line here in terms of its escalation. Israel wants to prioritize the Gazan arena, and we know that time is running out for that reason to continue holding back an Israeli decision on the north. And Hezbollah sees no opportunistic advantage here for escalating beyond what it has escalated. It's perfectly happy to stay and keep things as they are. They think that they're in some kind of win-win situation. So yes, I agree with the assumption in your question. Neither side right now has any element of surprise.
All right, Yaakov Lapin and Shadi Khalil, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, the board of the UN nuclear agency, the IAEA, has voted to censure Iran over its failure to cooperate over its nuclear program. Iran's foreign ministry strongly condemned the move. Last week, the IAEA released a report claiming Tehran had further increased its stockpile of uranium to near weapons-grade levels. Let's go to the UN headquarters in New York and our US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. And Mike, what does this move by the IAEA mean in real terms?
What it means is they're finally calling out Iran. There has been this game of chicken for the longest time in terms of these censures passed by the IAEA Board of Governors. There's been a lot of leeway being given to Iran to try to rectify the multitude of issues that the IAEA leadership says still exist in terms of its hiding or trying to cover up evidence of wrongdoing in terms of its agreements with the IAEA, whether it be cameras that are supposed to be turned on within its facilities, whether it's explaining uranium particles that have been found at certain facilities when those levels of uranium shouldn't be there for any given reason other than nefarious reasons. The IAEA and its membership has allowed Iran this running clock, essentially. And they finally said, enough. Enough is enough. They laid down this censure, and it says essentially it's not so much symbolic, although in a way it is, but it's more a diplomatic message to Iran saying this is essentially our first step. This is you now being put on notice. You're not getting away with what you thought you're getting away with anymore. Now we're going to see down the line at the next meeting whether the E3 and the United States and other IAEA governors and membership take further steps against Iran. But they really can't take further steps until they lay down this censure first.
Meanwhile, Mike, some changes at the UN Security Council coming up. Somalia and Pakistan are among countries set to get seats. It sounds like this might not work in Israel's favour.
No, let's look at the positive here, Lauren. It's tough to look at the positive at the UN. Yes, indeed, there were elections for the non-permanent members of the Security Council. 5 of the 10 members will come in next year, Pakistan and Somalia among them. But also among them, Denmark, Panama, and Greece. Denmark, just in recent days, their parliament voted down an opportunity to recognize the Palestinian state. They're continuing, despite criticism, arms exchanges and transfers with Israel. Panama, the only Latin American state that is yet to recognize the Palestinian state, good general relations with Israel. And Greece, generally speaking, good relations with Israel, especially in regional forums. And of course, the enemy of, my enemy is my friend. And when we're talking about Greece and Israel, Turkey is the enemy there as well. So not all bad news on that front, Laura, though it is the UN.
Yeah, the glass half full. Let's look at it that way. Thank you, Mike. Mike Wagenheim there over in New York. Well, Hamas has welcomed a move by Spain to join South Africa in its case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. The Spanish government says it wants to be on, quote, the right side of history. Bianca Zanini has this report.
Spain will intervene in the procedure of the International Court of Justice initiated by South Africa regarding the situation in Gaza.
Spain is the latest country to join South Africa, Ireland, Mexico and Chile in the ongoing international case against Israel and accusing the country of genocide in Gaza. Last month, the ICJ ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah in a vaguely worded statement. This Wednesday, the EU told Israel it needs to talk about their relationship. After meeting with the EU's 27 foreign ministers, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell invited his Israeli counterpart, Israel Katz, to discuss the cooperation between the two, specifically the so-called Association Agreement, which forms the legal basis for their trade relations. Borrell expects to discuss the situation in Gaza, Israel's compliance with human rights obligations under the agreement, and how Israel expects to comply with the recent ruling of the International Court of Justice. There's been no immediate comment from Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Borrell has been openly critical of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the government's military actions in Gaza. And less than 2 weeks ago, he repeated his call for a two-state solution.
Everybody said that we need a two-state solution. But at the end, while people are saying that, the settlers are occupying more and more land on the West Bank. The violence continues, and the two-state solution looks every day more difficult to reach. So we should start talking about it and start doing something.
Article 2 of the Association Agreement highlights that cooperation is built on respect for human rights and democratic principles. So when the EU says it wants to discuss those issues, it's reminding Israel that their support is not unconditional. A warning with significant weight since Europe is Israel's main trading partner, accounting for about a third of the small country's total trade. The move comes a day after the Slovenian parliament approved the recognition of an independent Palestinian state, following in the steps of Spain, Ireland, and Norway.
I don't expect from the EU to achieve some form of unanimity on this question. We have seen already that some states are more willing, perhaps, to move closer to recognition, but states such as Hungary fiercely reject the idea, and other states like France and Germany are also more reserved to issue a recognition at this stage. These recognitions come because of what Israel is doing, not because of what Palestine is doing.
11 of the 27 European Union members have now recognized Palestine as a state.
Well, time for a short break. Up next, Yemen's Houthis are claiming that they managed to launch an attack on Haifa port in northern Israel today, but the IDF says it never happened. We'll have more on that next. Stay with us.
Este es bueno. Cambió.
Welcome back. Well, Israel is under attack from multiple fronts and the West Bank has been heating up in recent weeks. Let's take a listen to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the latest IDF raids in the city of Jenin.
I have just conducted a situation assessment in the Central Command. The state of Israel is in a difficult battle on many fronts. We are fighting in the south, we are fighting in the north, we are also fighting here in Judea and Samaria. This effort is being carried out in the midst of difficult international pressures that are exerted on us. But I can guarantee one thing, whatever happened will not happen. We will change this reality. I trust the soldiers, our commanders, and our security forces to ensure the security of Israel.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Yaakov Lapin is from the Miriam Institute, the Jewish News Syndicate and the Alma Center. So just talk us through the situation in the West Bank right now.
Well, we're definitely seeing an escalation, and it's not actually new. It's been going on for months. It actually preceded this war. If we look at the stats for 23, there was a doubling of terror attacks compared to the year before. And now, obviously, Hamas has been trying to set the West Bank on fire. And in many ways, I think, terrorists in the West Bank are drawing their inspiration or their lack of motivation, depends which way it goes, based on events in Gaza. If they see that the IDF is doing well in Gaza, I think that will tamper their motivation, it will decrease it. And if they think that Israel's treading water in the Gaza Strip, I think that will help motivate them to conduct attacks. So we have all different kinds of terrorism in the West Bank, the organized kind, orchestrated by Hamas from Lebanon, from Turkey. The Shin Bet in recent days announced that it foiled a major bombing run involving Palestinians in the West Bank that was orchestrated by Hamas in Turkey. And then there is the local terrorist cells, and then there are also individual lone wolf terrorists. This is altogether a significant threat. The IDF has been working very hard, conducting nightly raids, essentially keeping a lid on the situation. But what we hear about are the attacks that slip through the nets.
All right, Yaakov, thank you very much. Well, let's talk about another of those fronts. Israel has dismissed claims by Yemen's Houthis that they managed to attack ships in Haifa port today. The terrorist group says it teamed up with Iranian-backed militias in Iraq to target 3 ships. Israel says it never happened. The Houthis have fabricated attacks in the past, and now a new missile complete with a kafir. The Houthis call it their Palestine missile, and it resembles one of Iran's hypersonic missiles. To talk more about all of that, Dr. Elizabeth Kendall is a Middle East expert and the head of Girton College at Cambridge University. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Kendall. And the United States and the United Kingdom did carry out some limited airstrikes on Yemen not so long ago, but the threat from the Houthis, not just to Israel but to global shipping, has only got worse, hasn't it? What will it take to stop them?
Yes, you're right. The attacks by the Houthis have actually got worse since the US and the UK began their airstrikes back in January. The Houthis have now fired missiles and drones at well over 100 ships in the Red Sea and sometimes beyond, as well as firing round about 200 plus missiles directly at Israel, which have perhaps been less what they might term successful than those in the Red Sea. There's been a recent surge as well. So I think what we can say is that the US, UK airstrikes aren't really working, or at least they're not working yet, and they're not working as effectively as had been anticipated. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One is ideological and one is practical. Ideologically, the Houthis realize that they're winning broad popularity, they've gained international notoriety, and it's increasing their leverage regionally in ongoing talks to try to find a way out of the domestic civil war in Yemen. And then practically, we just have to be realistic. The Houthis are very resilient. They've been fighting a war against much better armed powers, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for the last 9 years. And the nature of this is asymmetric. So they don't have to be sophisticated in their attacks. They just need to keep going in order to keep winning. So not losing is in fact winning.
Okay, well, here in Israel, there was a report this week which showed footage of the Houthis actively trading to invade Israel, a country, more than 2,000 kilometers away. What is the purpose of this? Why is this in the interest of Yemenis, who are the poorest people, of course, in the Arab world?
The plight of Palestinians has long been forefront in the minds of Yemenis. And the Houthis have, of course, got Israel, death to Israel, in their very slogan. And that slogan hasn't been around forever, but it's been around for at least 20 years. So it's all part of an ongoing propaganda and, one would say, a kind of indoctrination process. The Houthis may not be fantastic militarily, they're fairly unsophisticated, but they're very committed. And their propaganda apparatus is perhaps stronger than their military one. And one might suggest that it would be a better idea to start focusing more resources on dismantling their propaganda apparatus than perhaps putting everything into trying to dismantle their missile launching. Because, of course, it's this indoctrination, this ongoing propaganda that really perpetuates cycles of violence and enmity against Israel for generations. So there are many examples of this. There are summer camps. There's a TV channel called Al Masirah. There's a website. The TV channels actually run out of Beirut.
Is this all funded by Iran? I was going to ask.
Well, it's probably helped along by Iran. I don't think it's an accident that the TV channel Al Masirah has been run out of Beirut, which is, of course, the base of Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran. But what we're seeing is that this is going to be a long war. No matter what happens next, if you have hundreds of thousands of children, indeed the Houthis claim that well over 1 million under 18s have been through their camps, and that's probably not an underestimate, then we know that this is going to be a conflict that's going to last a very long time, even if there were a ceasefire tomorrow.
Dr. Elizabeth Kendall, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yaakov Lapin is still with us. So Houthis training to launch a ground invasion of Israel, but more seriously, they are getting hold of some pretty scary missiles, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, the Iranians have been giving them, some of the best missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones that have been coming out of Iranian defense industries. There's no question in my mind that the U.S. military has received instructions from the White House not to activate the full capacity of its firepower. The U.S. can activate massive firepower if it wants to against the Houthis, and it's not. It's activating minimal firepower and essentially trying to limit its role to kind of being like an Iron Dome over ships in the Red Sea. This is not going to be enough. Playing defense against jihadist proxies of Iran is never enough, and it's also worth noting who is not part of this task force in the Red Sea. The ones who are actually the most threatened by the Houthis, that would be the Saudis and the Emiratis, all of whom have been attacked by the Houthis. They're not there because I don't think they trust the commitment of the White House to remain in this fight, and also, the arms embargo that was placed for offensive weapons on the Saudis, which is only now being lifted. That's not exactly going to be the kind of move that you need to build a regional coalition that's willing to attack together. I'm not talking about defense. So there are a lot of question marks about the ability of the region to put together a coalition to deal with these Iranian proxies, because that's ultimately what's needed, in my opinion, to get the job done.
All right. Yaakov Lapin, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Well, the Houthis, Hezbollah and Hamas, all directed and funded, of course, by Iran. But my next guest says the US government and the West more broadly is failing to make the connection, allowing Iran to destabilise and weaken liberal democracies. Mariam Mimah-Sadeghi is the founder and director of the Cyrus Forum and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Great to see you, Mariam. Thank you for joining us. So you've written that Biden has compartmentalized Hamas from Iran. Can you tell us a bit about what you mean by that and what are the implications?
Yes, I mean, it's common knowledge that without Iran's regime, Hamas would not have the power to terrorize Israel the way that it has for many years, but especially on October 7th. So it's common knowledge, well reported and known by the U.S. government, of course, that Hamas's funding, weaponry, intelligence, propaganda, diplomatic cover comes from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And shortly after the October 7th attack, almost immediately, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei celebrated the attack by tweeting video of young Israelis fleeing the Nova Music Festival. The former foreign minister Abdullahian visited, and Ismail Haniyeh in Doha. They have really made it no secret that they're very proud of what their terror proxy force has achieved with its October 7th terror attack. But immediately after the attack, Biden himself said that we can't connect the dots directly to Iran's regime, even though prior to his statement, prior to Biden's statement, the Wall Street Journal had in fact reported about the regime's direct involvement in planning the October 7th attack. And that compartmentalizing, cordoning off the regime from scrutiny and consequence for the October 7th attack has just continued by the Biden administration. In other words, its policy of appeasement continued rather than for October 7th to be a reality check, a U-turn, a recognition that the appeasement has only led to more terror and a ramping up of the nuclear program. The Biden administration decided to continue to appease Iran's regime.
Well, not all Palestinians are happy to be used as pawns in Tehran's plans. It was interesting, wasn't it, to hear the Palestinian president this week, Mahmoud Abbas, really criticised Ayatollah Khamenei for praising the October 7th attacks. Abbas said it had, in fact, exacted a great price in Palestinian blood. Are we seeing some signs of resistance from the very people that Iran claims to champion?
Yes, I mean, it would be wise, I think, for protesters in the West at the most elite American colleges, universities, to recognize that Palestinians themselves really don't like being used as pawns, as fodder for the Islamic Republic's war. I mean, for 45 years, the regime in Iran has talked about Palestinian resistance, but it has only use the Palestinian people to sustain itself, to sustain its rule. I mean, these terror proxies are appendages, are tentacles of the octopus. The head is in Tehran, and as long as the West, and particularly the United States, doesn't treat these terror proxies as the regime itself, then Tehran will continue to grow in its power and nefarious influence, and will continue to use these terror proxies to wreak absolute chaos, devastation, particularly on the Israeli people.
Yeah, and you mentioned the American university students. It was really bizarre, wasn't it, to hear Khamenei congratulate those students for protesting on behalf of Hamas, especially when we see what young people in Iran are having to deal with when they try to go out and protest. Do you think this plan has worked out better than Khamenei could ever have dreamed of?
Exactly, Laura. I mean, you would think it would be a reality check for students at places like Princeton, Harvard, Yale, to think that if the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, a regime that regularly, systematically tortures and rapes students for standing up for the most basic of their civil liberties, that when that supreme leader is congratulating them for their so-called resistance and solidarity with Palestinians, then maybe they're on the wrong side of history. Maybe they've gotten something very, very wrong. But unfortunately in America, we see that that sentiment is continuing. And from the left, from the political left, we don't see nearly enough moral clarity in response to what is a deep, deep confusion in the universities.
Mariam Memasadehi, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Alibaba and the 40 thieves. That's reportedly what the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates shouted at members of the Palestinian Authority during a meeting in Riyadh earlier this year. Let's get the story with our Dubai correspondent, Bastien Bourri. Bastien, what exactly was said during this apparently very heated exchange?
Yes, during this meeting, and this is according to a report by Axios Media, Hussein al-Sheikh, who's Mahmoud Abbas's closest deputy, said that the Palestinian Authority was conducting reforms and creating a new government as the US and Arab countries asked, but that this new government wasn't getting enough political and financial support. So he basically accused the Gulf countries of not doing enough. And towards the end of the meeting, still according to Axios, which I'm citing, the Emirati Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed pushed back and said that al-Sheikh's statement was a lie and that he hadn't seen any reform inside the Palestinian Authority. And it was then that he gave the Palestinian leadership this nickname, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, claiming that senior officials in the Palestinian Authority were, quote, useless. Then the Palestinian minister reportedly shouted back, saying nobody could dictate to the PA how to conduct its reforms, and then the Emirati slammed the door.
And this is very unusual for the diplomats from the UAE. I mean, they do pride themselves on their diplomacy, don't they, and their ability to talk to everyone. This is a country that has ties, of course, with Israel, but also with Iran and all countries across the world.
Absolutely, but it also says a lot about the relationship between the UAE and the Palestinian Authority itself, which is not good. First of all, these relations between the Gulf countries can be generalized to the whole Gulf, not only the UAE on the one hand, and the PA on the other hand, have deteriorated, particularly since the signing of the Abraham Accords, which the Palestinians regarded as you know, as a stab in the back and a sort of betrayal of the Palestinian people. But in reality, the problem is much older. The Emiratis blame Ramallah for its weakness, for the strengthening of Hamas, for the ongoing erosion of the PA's public support, for its rampant corruption, its budget difficulties, even the political stalemate with Israel, etc., etc. And Abu Dhabi's very firm stance also stems from the fact that the Emiratis support Mahmoud Abbas's powerful enemy, Mohammed Dahlan, who's been acting as political advisor to the Emirati president. And Dahlan's influence is highly visible today. He's become a true strategic mastermind here in the UAE, pretty much against Mahmoud Abbas, to whom he swears revenge, since it was Abbas who drove him out of the Palestinian Authority in the first place.
And of course, there is a lot of criticism of the Israeli government for not articulating what it sees as the future for the Palestinians, particularly, of course, in Gaza. How does the UAE see a future Palestinian state?
The UAE wants this state within the 1967 borders, without Hamas at the helm. And from a more economic point of view, there are in Saudi and the UAE giant governmental companies that are absolutely ready to build projects for housing, transportation, tourism, energy, industry, and so on, especially within the Gaza Strip. And both Saudi and the Emirates are competing for regional influence, so they will get involved. Gaza will be an investment with a big return on investment for the Gulf on Israel's doorstep, which would give them leverage over Israel.
Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Bory there in Dubai. Now, yet another sign that Iranian dissidents are unsafe in London. 32-year-old Navid Bavi was granted asylum in the UK. Last week, he turned up to voice his opposition to a memorial that was being held for President Raisi, also known as the Butcher of Tehran, who was killed in a helicopter crash last month. But pro-regime thugs then appeared and beat him so badly he may never walk again. 2 other female dissidents were also attacked and were sexually assaulted. London's Jewish Chronicle broke the story. To talk more about that, let's go to London. We're joined by Vahid Beheshti. He's an Iranian human rights activist who's also based in London. Vahid, thank you very much for being with us. This is chilling to read and chilling to see, because this is pretty much exactly what happens on the streets of Iranian cities, isn't it? How is it that this has been imported to Britain?
Thank you, Laura, for having me. Today, I'm not in London. I'm in somewhere else, and I'm traveling. So let me start with this. Today is D-Day. It's the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and we remember and honor all those the extraordinary courage and sacrifices that was made by all those allied forces against Nazi fascism. 80 80 years ago, which has led to the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi fascists. And we have to learn from it today, stand together, united against all forms of extremism, tyranny, especially, I emphasize, Islamist fascism and extremism. And this is exactly what we are witnessing today. This is not the only problem of UK. This is the problem of whole Europe, Canada, and America today. You saw what happened in Germany a few days ago to the police officers. And unfortunately, this is due to the wrong policy, Laura, and the appeasement policies of our leaders, of our police in here, in UK and other places. Unfortunately, this is, let me put it first in this way. This event and incident that we are seeing is not a sign that the Iranian regime is not due to that Iranian regime and their proxies and these thugs are strong. Is actually to the Jew that our political society in West is suffering from some kind of, I don't know, neglect and ignorance. So they don't know anything about their enemies. They don't know anything about the Iranian regime and their proxies and these thugs, Islamists, which they are part of their Iranian proxies in the West. So how can they confront them? How can they deal with them when they don't know anything about them? They don't know anything about their culture.
Would it make a difference if the authorities were to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization, for example? Would that make a difference?
Definitely, because IRGC, why we are standing in front of, UK Foreign Office for more than a year now, because when they place IRGC on the terrorist list, so very easily we can shut down any of their affiliation, especially in UK and any country that they are designated as a terrorist organizations. That's why they are really resisting to do this. The IRGC prescription is one of the great ways. But let me just tell you something, give you one example of what happened in the first Saturday after October the 7th. When these thugs attack our camp, you remember, the police were too busy to convince me to hide the Israeli flag or leave the camp and go somewhere as not to provoke these Islamists, these thugs. So what is this? This is exactly the way that the so-called morality and IRGC members treating women and Iranian people inside of Iran. They're telling women to cover their hair and cover their body in order to not provoke the man. So Iranian regime successfully export their, I would say, censorship, their intimidation and repression policies to the West. And let me, Laura, close it with this. This is the cause, this behavior of the police caused our society in the West to become very polarized. You saw what happened last Saturday in London. All the British patriots, all the British citizens, they came out. They're not going to stay quiet. One of the Islamists on their YouTube channel, this is going to surprise you, in UK, blatantly he says we have our own gangsters. So he's threatening the Christian and Jewish society in UK. And he's living in UK. He's teaching in university in one of the universities in one of the universities. So the British people, the British patriots, not just in UK, they're everywhere. People are not going to stay quiet.
People need to be more aware of what's going on. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Vahid, we appreciate it. Vahid, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Vahid Beheshti there. Well, the US State Department has just announced it's imposing sanctions on the terrorist group in the West Bank called the Lion's Den. More on that now.
Amid heightened tensions in the West Bank, the U.S. slapped extremist Israeli settlers with sanctions with the hope to quell them. Little did it know, these same settlers would feel little to no effect from the sanctions, even saying it emboldened them, meant as a deterrent and punishment for violent actions against Palestinians by some settler activists. In total, 13 individuals have been the recipient of U.S. sanctions that see asset freezes, travel, as well as visa bans. But the tight-knit community living in the West Bank rallied to bypass the penalties.
At first, the sanctions affected me a bit, but that ended quickly. A lot of people helped, and in the end, we came out stronger. They tried to weaken us, but we came out much stronger.
Since October 7th, with all eyes on Israel's military activities in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank has seen both a rise in Palestinian terror attacks, as well as vigilante actions by extremists in the Israeli settler community.
We're getting much more support from enormous parts of the public who have understood what we've been saying for years, that we're dealing with a murderous enemy that is fighting against us, that only settling the land will bring security, that any place where we are not present and do not control will breed terrorism, that if we allow Hamas a Palestinian state, then the same kind of terrorism and murder that happened in Gaza could happen here in Judea and Samaria. We're experiencing much more support, thank God.
Meanwhile, Palestinians living in the area feel that the sanctions haven't restrained the settlers at all.
Yinon and Al Yashiv destroyed our farms and our lands and cultivation. These sanctions are not enough. We demand more and more to deter them and return them to the right path.
On February 25th, Yinon told me not to come to this area, even though I was far away from his area. He put a gun to my head, he kicked my son with his leg, and said it is forbidden to come here. He then continued and went to my house and threatened my family.
The U.S. and other countries have threatened more sanctions in order to keep settler activity in the West Bank on a tighter leash. But with far-right Israeli ministers and politicians vowing support for the sanctioned settlers, they say they're undeterred by the threat of foreign sanctions.
The truth of the matter is that the United States wants us to be in Gaza because the United States doesn't want jihad to rule the world. This shelling, these bombs, nobody in the world wants it except people who believe in the theories of Islam. So the United States thanks me for defending not just the road, defending the free world.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Many thanks for watching, and do stay with us on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David is up next. From me and the team, good night.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It is day 244 of Israel's war against Hamas. The terror group has yet to officially respond to the latest hostage deal proposal, but the hopes for its acceptance are dimming, with Hamas officials claiming it received a proposal from mediators different from the one that was presented by President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, the battle for Gaza rages on. A terror cell was intercepted and neutralized by Israeli troops this morning while attempting to infiltrate into Israel from Rafah. 3 terrorists were killed and 1 IDF soldier, warrant officer and Bedouin tracker Zaid Mazarib, 34. That attempted attack came as Hamas accuses Israel of killing dozens of displaced Palestinians in a UNRWA school, which the IDF says was being used by Hamas for cover. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more in this report.
8 months after its October onslaught that sparked the war in Gaza, Hamas continues with its attempts to infiltrate Israel. The IDF said its forces shot and killed 3 militants who entered the Israeli-controlled buffer zone near the Israel-Gaza border under the cover of heavy fog early Thursday morning and opened fire at the forces. The army said 34-year-old officer Ziad Mazarib of the Bedouin tracking unit was killed in a firefight. Based on the equipment found in the possession of the killed terrorists, they were planning to raid a nearby military base or civilian community. Inside Gaza, the Hamas-controlled health ministry says over 40 people were killed in an Israeli strike on an UNRWA school in the Nuseirat refugee camp.
We were sleeping when we suddenly saw a rocket falling on us. On the second floor, there were martyrs. On the first, there were injured.
The IDF says 20 to 30 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists were hiding inside the UN school in central Gaza, and that the school was struck only after taking a number of steps to reduce risk to uninvolved civilians.
A few days ago, we completed our mission in Jabalia. After eliminating many enemies in terror infrastructure, in addition to returning the bodies of 3 hostages for burial in Israel, we are currently going on the offensive in El Buraj camp area. We will destroy the enemy, strike its infrastructure, and do everything possible to bring back the hostages.
Meanwhile, Hamas reportedly rejected the Israeli proposal for a hostage and ceasefire deal, claiming it was fundamentally different from the outline laid out by U.S. President Joe Biden last week. Saudi channel Asharq News, citing a Hamas memo sent to representatives of Palestinian factions, reported that Hamas requested clarifications from the mediators. Despite the latest negative indications from Hamas, it has yet to deliver its official response.
And joining us in the studio for more, Sherry Fine-Grossman, member of the Forum Dvora, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security, and former head of regional affairs for Israel's National Security Council, and Ambassador Dror Adar, the former Israeli ambassador to Italy in San Marino. And Sherry, how could we look at what's happening now in Rafah? At the same time, we see, despite everything that's happening, Hamas is trying to still take offensive moves, infiltrating into Israel. We still see the fighting going on in central Gaza and even in parts of northern Gaza. So again, a lot of the public looking at this from the outside, it's hard to get a clear picture of how well the advance into Rafah is going.
Well, I think if I can make it a little bit simpler, we're basically still on the outskirts of Rafah. There are some forces that are advancing towards the center of the city, but we're still on the outskirts, on the border with Egypt. And Hamas is doing a smart thing, instead of playing defense, he's going on the offensive, try to, confuse us, trying to, combat what we're trying to do. And he's very much counting on the diplomatic front of Israel's being isolated in the global arena. That's why you see him continuing to, he hasn't refused yet, but we assume he will. So this is, the situation right now, and I think the IDF is trying to surprise Hamas in other places where he least expected, like we see in the center, in Nasarat, in El Borej, in other places.
And trying to keep it from reestablishing itself in those in those areas. Again, UNRWA coming to the center here. We know there's even a process in Israel to try to designate it as a terrorist organization, a move that's being opposed internationally. Again, we see, it appears, Hamas using the UN agency as a way to sort of draw diplomatic fire onto Israel, even as Israel advances.
No, it's not that Hamas is using UNRWA. UNRWA is protecting Hamas. UNRWA is an arm of Hamas. In fact, I don't know if the viewer know, there are two organizations of refugees in the world, in UN. One for all the refugees in the world, and the second only for the Palestinians. And only the Palestinian can inherit their privilege, the right of being refugee to the next generation. So thus, they became from 500,000 refugees in 1948 to I don't know how many millions they claim today. So UNRWA is a fake organization because it does not help to solve the problem, but to perpetuate it. So what we saw now, you can see that the building is still was not destroyed. Only specific rooms in this building where the terrorists were. I suggest to everybody not to lean on the information of these neo-Nazis, because it's the same thing like Lord Howe and all other informators that we know from history. We know that the UN reduced I don't know, by half or by third the numbers of casualties and deaths from the official numbers of Hamas. So even now, what we know that we had information about the terrorists, and again, UNRWA remain a place for them not only to hide, but to blame Israel. Right. But what Israel showed now, that nothing is protected, even no masks. If they launch war from there, or launch, I don't know, missiles, they will be destroyed.
Right.
No, I want to a little bit elaborate on that. It's not that nothing is protected. It's that if you're hiding in a protected place, but you're using it for terror objectives, it shouldn't be protected anymore. Right, right. It loses its status, and that's very important. We don't deliberately attack schools or mosques or anything, but the world must realize, and it must be much more vocal and more, outspoken about the fact that they misuse these protected spaces to hide from,
such as hospitals,
schools, and I think we wouldn't be where we are right now if the world was much more vigilant about this issue, was much more, outspoken and really going against Hamas and even its supporters like Qatar and others about this.
Right. I've just mentioned the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Goy, will speak tonight. I'm going to presume he's going to have more details on this and exactly what the specific targets were.
But think about it. We have to apologize for attacking these terrorists. It's incredible. I'm asking for the thousand times in this war, where was the world, where 500,000 of people were dead by Assad in Syria and other places? They're speaking about terrorists, about neo-Nazis. It's incredible. This is the base of our fighting, not only against these Hamas or terrorists, but also against the will of the world to restrain us from saving not only Israel, saving the world.
Well, I want to go now focus on the north. There are sirens, air raid sirens going off as we speak, alerts in northern communities. Meanwhile, the IDF is now investigating why air raid sirens, in fact, failed to go off ahead of yesterday's attack by 2 explosive drones launched by Hezbollah that hit the Israeli village of Horfesh, just south of the Lebanon border. Now, the drone attack injured 10 people and killed 39-year-old Reserves IDF Staff Sergeant Rafael Kauders. His death brings the number of deaths on the northern front since October 7th to 25, 10 civilians and 15 soldiers. Now, the IDF has retaliated to the attack with strikes at Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Iran-backed militia continues its cross-border fire into northern Israel. Even as we're speaking, let's go to our correspondent, Zach Anders, who's in Horfesh in northern Israel. Zach, we'll get to yesterday's incident in a minute, but just update us because we are seeing some rocket air raid siren alerts in the north.
Yeah, within the last 5 minutes, another set of alarms. This one is an alarm for a drone infiltration. We're waiting to get confirmation or receive any word of what's been taking place. We do know of what's happened in Kiryat Shmona. There is damage to a building in the center of town and an explosion. We don't have any reports of casualties, and we don't know if this was potentially a drone or a rocket that was exploded or bits of the falling interception. It does appear that the interceptor missiles were fired at this target, and the alert did come across as a hostile drone. That was about half an hour ago. Damage moderate to the side of the building from what we can tell, although it looks like the explosion's rather big on the roof of the building, so we'll wait until we can get some images of the damage to the roof of what appears to be the mall there in the center of Kiryat Shmona. So remarkable there, and as you mentioned, we're still in this aftermath as Hezbollah now at this point in the night has claimed responsibility for 6 attacks. Neither of those 2 drone alerts they have claimed responsibility for at this point in the night. But this last week has been really remarkable. We have this incident, like you mentioned yesterday, where this drone has traveled roughly 2 miles inside Israeli airspace without triggering an alarm, without an interception taking place before it leads to these casualties and the death of this reservist soldier. It's also, we're looking at a week here where we've seen Hezbollah post footage of striking a Iron Dome battery location here in the north. And the footage does appear to be authentic. The IDF has not commented on the specific event, but really a remarkable set of circumstances here to know that the air defenses certainly did fail yesterday, and that Hezbollah has been publishing, or at least published in the last 48 hours, footage of them striking an air defense target, and it does appear successfully. Of course, the IDF won't comment on incidents such as these going forward, but the footage is very hard to dispute at this point. So again, a very tense situation that we're in the middle of. And we have the commander of Northern Command here with the IDF stating very declaratively for the first time over the course of this conflict, Major General Yuri Gordon saying, quote, "Last week we completed preparations for an attack in the north. I meet with the troops and the commanders. They're training and determined." He said this after meeting to commemorate the first Lebanon war that began on this day back in 1982.
All right, Zach Anders there in Horfesh, of course, the scene of that unfortunate attack yesterday. Zach, thank you for that. And Sherry, certainly the IDF is operating under a set of constraints right now that are more due strategically due to diplomacy and the bigger picture. But even on the tactical level, the IDF is taking some blows here from these small drones that are being launched by Hezbollah and other terror groups, by, it seems, intelligence. that Hezbollah has to know that to strike at a target. It seems they knew there were soldiers gathered. The question is, the IDF, are they going to be evolve in time to at least hold that front, hold casualties to a minimum, until their time, maybe when a decision will have to be made for a bigger attack?
I'm sure they will. They're working on it as we speak. I know from friends who are in the drone industry that a lot of technology startups are involved there now with the IDF to try to get a solution, a technological solution to this problem. And I'm sure the Israel innovative mindset will come up with a solution. It takes a bit of time, but we have to be patient. And of course, the results right now are terrible. And of course, Hezbollah has a few cards up his sleeve that surprises us. We have maybe a bit more. But look, there's no positive outcome in an escalation here. But other side, there's no solution. There's no anything. But again, the deterrence of international allies such as the U.S. And such as Europe that are now very much involved with the elections at home, both the European Parliament and both the U.S. So I think they're taking advantage, anti-democratic forces, just Hezbollah, and everything is coming from Iran and its proxies. It's all navigated through there.
Right, they're the diplomatic restraints on Israel. There's also the fact it's fighting on the Gaza front. Fighting on two fronts may be difficult, but draw the pressure, even internally, on Prime Minister Netanyahu to do something about the North is going to become, I think, at some degree, certainly unbearable for him, as it is already unbearable for the residents of the North.
No, it will be, the pressure, he can handle this pressure because the vast majority of the Israelis, I think also in the Jewish people, are with him and back him and back the government. And we can think about many solutions to what's happening now, or this disgrace in the North. But the best solution will come very soon, and it will be attack.
Right.
It can't be that the Lebanese will stay in their places while our north border, there is a strip of refugees, of evacuated communities there, and this must stop. Everybody knows it, and I think that it's a question of timing. I recalled the time of in 1973 in Yom Kippur War, when to cross the Canal of Suez, and there were some voices to cross it now, and there was a general that wanted to get the perfect timing, and this makes us winning there, and I think it will be also now.
All right, but there is a price to be paid for that delay. But let's that'll be a subject.
The price now is heavier than this is the role of the IDF.
Yes, but that we'll leave that because that's going to be a discussion, a daily discussion. But we did mention the diplomatic pressure on Israel now, especially coming from European countries over, especially the military operation in Gaza. Spain, for example, announced it is joining South Africa's case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And wrapped up in an invitation to talk, EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell is sending a warning now to Israel. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini breaks that down.
Spain will intervene in the procedure of the International Court of Justice initiated by South Africa regarding the situation in Gaza.
Spain is the latest country to join South Africa, Ireland, Mexico and Chile in the ongoing international case against Israel and accusing the country of genocide in Gaza. Last month, the ICJ ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah in a vaguely worded statement. This Wednesday, the EU told Israel it needs to talk about their relationship. After meeting with the EU's 27 foreign ministers, EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell invited his Israeli counterpart, Israel Katz, to discuss the cooperation between the two, specifically the so-called association agreement, which forms the legal basis for their trade relations. Borrell expects to discuss the situation in Gaza, Israel's compliance with human rights obligations under the agreement, and how Israel expects to comply with the recent ruling of the International Court of Justice. There's been no immediate comment from Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Borrell has been openly critical of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the government's military actions in Gaza. And less than 2 weeks ago, he repeated his call for a two-state solution.
Everybody say that we need a two-state solution, but at the end, while people are saying that, the settlers are occupying more and more land on the West Bank, the violence continues, and the two-state solution looks every day more difficult to reach. So we should start talking about it and start doing something.
Article 2 of the Association Agreement highlights that cooperation is built on respect for human rights and democratic principles. So when the EU says it wants to discuss those issues, it's reminding Israel that their support is not unconditional. A warning with significant weight since Europe is Israel's main trading partner, accounting for about a third of the small country's total trade. The move comes a day after the Slovenian parliament approved the recognition of an independent Palestinian state, following in the steps of Spain, Ireland, and Norway.
I don't expect from the EU to achieve some form of unanimity on this question. We have seen already that some states are more willing perhaps to move closer to recognition, but states such as Hungary fiercely reject the idea, and other states like France and Germany are also more reserved to issue a recognition at this stage. These recognitions come because of what Israel is doing, not because of what Palestine is doing.
11 of the 27 European Union members have now recognized Palestine as a state.
Right. Dror, you're one of Israel's former ambassadors to Europe, to Italy in this case. And the question is, how much are Spain and Ireland sort of outliers or signposts for what may be coming? I'm going to add also, by the way, the very disturbing development in France last week where they canceled Israel participation in a key defense industry show. How much of a risk is there of even economic sanctions from Europe?
I think that this war against Gaza, against Hamas, against also Hezbollah, if we can compare it historically, it is like a prelude or prologue to what happened in Europe in 1936 in Spain in the Civil War, because it was a prologue to a bigger war of the World War II. I think that Europe, as also in the 30s, that did not recognize the threat, even now does not recognize the threat and does not recognize the fact that Israel is fighting also for their lives, because now there are some big parts of Europe that are conquered by radical Islamists, and you see the let's say the remnants of anti-Semitism that we thought, I didn't think that, but there were some people that thought that it was part of the past, that now are awakening again. And I want to say only that Spain has a history with the Jewish people, and this stream of ideas has never stopped.
All right, I just want to move on because I do want to get to our correspondent who
in any case, we do not have to consider only this. We do not have to consider them in our war.
All right. I do want to go out to our correspondent who's out in Hostages Square, because as we said, the signs are not looking great now for a hostage deal, signs from Hamas, but the families are trying to remain optimistic. Let's go to Jennifer Hassan-Smith out in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And Jennifer, give us a sense of the mood there and the activities going on there.
Yes, hi, Caleb. In front of this sixth failed attempt to reach a ceasefire, the Hostage Square is the atmosphere, the ambiance is a little heavy, but because we're in Israel and people are definitely resilient and they keep their hopes up, as you can see behind me, and I'll move around so my cameraman Amnon can show you what is happening. Tonight is Idan Shtivi's 29th birthday, and he's still held hostage in captivity in Gaza. But his friends and his family wanted to get together, wanted to somehow celebrate his birthday. They want, and I spoke with many of them throughout the day, they are disappointed, of course, that this deal did not go through. But they're not surprised, so that's what they're saying. And at the same time, they want people to keep on talking about the hostages. They want people to still hear their names. They want them not to forget. They want the whole world not to forget about the hostages. Therefore, they've organized Idan Shtivi's 29th birthday tonight. And I've had a chance to speak to one of Idan's best friends this afternoon, and she's explained to us why they wanted to get together tonight. So let's listen to Moran, Idan's best friend.
Now it's dogs adoptions from SOS Shelter. Idan is an animals lover. He adopted 4 puppies. He adopted a puppy 1 month before he got kidnapped, and the puppy is now 11 months. Today is 29. Yes. And we think about him every day, and we send him energy every day, and we talk about him every day. And we hope for him to come back healthy in his mind, in his soul, in his body.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Happy birthday to Idan, and many happy returns, we hope soon. And we'll be right back.
Story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds. De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Go for P1.
Verify HB storage.
1. How you read me?
Good handle.
Yeah, if you could relay a message to our brethren at ULA.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. Israel at war day 244. Now, amid an increase in terror attacks in and around the West Bank, the IDF carried out a raid today in the city of Jenin, clashing there with militant groups. 2 Palestinians were reported killed in the firefight and 3 soldiers injured. At one point, an IDF helicopter was deployed to provide cover fire for fighters from the elite Duv Davan undercover unit. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu paid a visit later to IDF Central Command that covers the West Bank and had this to say about the situation there and on other fronts.
I have just conducted a situation assessment in the Central Command. The state of Israel is in a difficult battle on many fronts. We are fighting in the south, we are fighting in the north, we are also fighting here in Judea and Samaria. This effort is being carried out in the midst of difficult international pressures that are exerted on us. But I can guarantee one thing, whatever happened will not happen. We will change this reality. I trust the soldiers, our commanders, and our security forces to ensure the security of Israel.
And still with us in studio, Sherry Fine-Grossman of the Forum Devora and former Israeli ambassador to Italy, Dror Adar. And Sherry, the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu chose to go to the Central Command today underscores the situation in the West Bank that also has been deteriorating and concerns of possibly that, especially in the summer months coming along. And there's an economic situation, Hamas constantly trying to inflame them. How serious is the possibility of the West Bank, in essence, even though it's been active, but it even exploding to the degree where it almost becomes a third front now in the current situation?
It's been very, very, very hostile situation in the West Bank ever since the beginning of, and not just since the beginning, before. I mean, in a way, you could say there was many dozens of terrorist attacks every week in the West Bank before October 7. And in a way, I think it was kind of Hamas' plan to kind of, make Israel dormant about Gaza and make us focus on the West Bank. And then we had October 7, and then they're doing both. And I think everything is tied up to Iran. We have many intelligence report and publications about the fact that Iran is sending advanced armory and weapons, RPGs and other.
Certainly, there's been the IDF has intercepted those shipments through the Allenby Bridge and another.
It's not forever, and the motivation is there, and some of the capabilities is there, and it makes IDF have to go in every day to try to sort attacks on Israel.
Right. Again, as you said, the potentially very. It's been there certainly.
No,
there's always the possibility for serious escalation, which is one thing that Israel certainly doesn't need at this time. I do want to go back now to the diplomatic front. Now there have been some developments there, and I'll go to our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim in New York. And Mike, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, his rhetoric against Israel has grown increasingly harsh over the past several months, and reports that it's really taken maybe another step in escalation just now in the last couple of days.
That's right. There have been intense talks going on the last few months and even leading into the last few weeks between Israeli officials and the Secretary General's office regarding the so-called UN list of shame that Antonio Guterres compiles each year. It's a list of countries or armed groups that are committing grave violations against children. There were 66 such armed groups on the list last year. Those included the Myanmar military, Russia as well for its violations against Ukrainian children. Israel, according to Israel's Channel 13, Israel is going to be on that list this year. We expect the report to come out sometime in early to mid-July. It'll be presented to the Security Council. Now, Guterres' office just a moment ago refused to comment to I-24 News on that Israeli media report, saying that the report will be presented in due time to the Security Council. We've also reached out to the Israeli mission to the UN for comment. They have not replied immediately to our request. Now, this list of shame doesn't have any practical ramifications within itself. It's not a sanctions list in and of itself. However, it's very clear what its intentions are. A so-called list of shame like that, countries and armed groups that appear on that list can be blacklisted by other entities. It obviously causes great diplomatic harm. It can cause harm in terms of weapons transfers, boycotts, things of that nature. So if Israel winds up on this list, certainly only to cause more tensions between Jerusalem and Turtle Bay there. Guterres and Israeli officials have pretty much been out of touch for months now as that relationship continues to deteriorate.
All right, and certainly that would be an escalation. Of course, what really matters is in the Security Council, but all these steps tend to help in some degree undermine Israel's position there. Mike Wagenheim in New York, thank you for that. And Joy, here we have it's easy to say shmoom, as David Ben-Gurion said, sort of disregarding the UN. But at the end of the day, these things do chip away at Israel's legitimacy and the backing it needs in the Security Council, particularly from that crucial U.S. veto.
You know, I think at the second day after the massacre, I wrote that in my view, all these events, big, huge events, seems to me like biblical events. So I want to tell Guterres that the Jewish people is in this list, I don't know, a blacklist or outside for more than 3,000 years. Because people like Guterres has double standards, morality of double standards, and maybe the world wants things. It's not maybe, the world wants things from us, or measures or standards that does not require from other people. What we have to do now is to fight in this arena, and also to awake all our friends in the world and in the media, but we have to focus in this existential war that we have in the south and in the north. And people like Guterres or the UN, or I don't know other, cannot stop us from defending our existence. And this is what we are speaking about. We did not come here after 2,000 years of exile to be in a perpetual way of threat, being threatened from all over the place. You spoke about the east part of Israel and other. Israel has to focus on it, and you heard also Prime Minister and other, and I can reassure you that the soldiers in the field are determined to bring security and to destroy our enemies, destroy them.
All right. Well, Israel also does have to continue its battle on the diplomatic front and on the public diplomacy front. And on that note, I do want to refocus on the U.S. and one situation there in particular. Now, Dr. Logan Levkoff is an American Jewish author and educator. She specializes in sexuality and relationships, and she's been seen on such TV shows as Married at First Sight. Now, she's also been, I guess like Dr. Ruth, especially since October 7th, an advocate for Israel on social media and in the public sphere. But this past week, that issue hit closer to home for her in a controversy at the Fieldstone School. That's an elite, one of the top private high schools in the country, in New York City, which her son had attended. And where Levkoff said he had become targeted by pro-Palestinian classmates who called him an ethnic cleaner and a colonizer, where he saw teachers compare Jews to Nazis and saw some of them flash obscene gestures to visiting rabbis, and where students came out in support of another who had defaced the school with pro-Palestinian graffiti. Well, the situation at the school drew wide media attention this week after Levkoff posted that, quote, Fieldstone is a hotbed of Jew hate, and these terror-supporting students are the epitome of the trigger warning generation. And joining us from New York is educator and activist Dr. Logan Levkoff. And Dr. Levkoff, thank you for joining us. Now, of course, we're going to relate this to a bigger, more general issue about what's going on in the U.S. in schools. But let's talk about this one particular school in general and the situation, what happened with your son and what you saw there.
Yes. So my son graduated a year ago. He just finished his freshman year in college. And look, this is an issue that is not unique to this one school. This is what's happening everywhere. Oftentimes, the schools that proclaim to have the most progressive values and value free speech, for some reason, have complete double standards when it comes to Jews and when it comes to Israel. And so for years, we were dealing and fighting back with, anti-Semitism masked as anti-Zionism, a lot of agenda-driven teachers. And look, I'm sure you're wondering, which most people should, why did you keep your kid there all of those years? And the answer is this. Our kid is a fighter, and he is a proud Jewish Zionist. And he said to us, I got this. I know how to handle this. And we trusted that he could, and he very much did. But I do understand it might not be the right call for everyone.
Right. I just want to explain, though, this is one of the literally top private schools in the country. And it's an elite school, which is one of the reasons it's drawing so much attention. But you do raise a bigger issue there of the question that's been raised that also at major universities like Harvard and Columbia, do parents pull their kids out or encourage them not to go to those schools and to go to more, let's say, what could be called Israel-friendly or Jew-friendly schools, but in a sense leaving or sending them to Israel, as our guest is saying, or is saying, no, we can't abandon these elite institutions, that we have to some degree fight to keep a Jewish presence there, or those who are people who are more supportive, for example, of Israel?
Yes, it's a great question. By the way, my family and my son and my daughter too, for that matter, spend a great deal of time in Israel. So we do all of those things. But I want to remind people that this question first starts with who we are as parents and caregivers. So I grew up in a, very proudly Zionist family. My late grandfather was an American Zionist leader, and we always had this connection to Israel. We knew exactly who we were as a people. We knew our history. We know what was at stake. But I would tell you, the only way we can raise resilient, strong Jewish kids who are capable of withstanding fighting Jew hate and the blowback and the risks that come with it, well, to do that, we need to model that. Right? We need to practice what we preach. We need to show them how it's done. And that's the question that we need to ask before we decide what to do with these schools. Have we prepared our kids for the onslaught with what's about to happen? And for some of us, look, in my family, maybe to the extreme, we did it, and we did it all the time. But there are a lot of families who have only woken up after the absolute worst to find out, this wasn't just about Israel. This was about us as global Jewry.
Well, can I just ask you then what kind of reactions just in the last few days you may have gotten from parents and families at Fieldstone? Because as I said before, your comments on it got widely reported there, especially in New York. What kind of reactions did you get to the stance and comments you made?
It's a good question. And I got a lot of support, I have to say. A lot of families have been reaching out to me and to my son saying, this was our experience. Thank you for speaking up. We've been too afraid to. And I understand, because the stakes are high, and it's hard to fight, but critically important to do so. Is everyone thrilled with me? No, of course not. There are some people that don't always like the whistleblower, but to be honest, I was fighting this for years and very public about my fight. This was not a new conversation. Maybe it's new to some, but, to me, I was raised to speak up for our people and for our dignity and for our humanity, and I don't see us doing this any other way. The stakes are too high. If we don't call this out, I've devoted my life to fighting for everyone else. Now it's our time.
All right. Again, I should mention that you are known for your work, which has become quite public, on sexuality and relations. I use the Dr. Ruth comparison. So that is your profession, but you have been very active since October 7th, using your platform to advocate on behalf of Israel and to call out things such as we happened at the Fieldstone School, indicative of a much bigger problem. Dr. Logan Levkoff, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you so much.
Right. And Shiri, I saw that you wanted to react to that.
Because today I participated in a very unique conference about TikTok and China's influence and what it's doing with TikTok. And I think we're not getting it. 68% of under 34 are using Instagram or TikTok, and we're seeing values that are being perpetuated and promoted on TikTok to be anti-democratic values. And this is not a coincidence. A letter to America by Bin Laden is not a
and
coincidence.
And who's on TikTok? The young
exactly,
people.
And this is what you're seeing. So it's influencing, it's either, you can say, it's either a manipulation of those platforms or a strategic decision by anti-democratic forces like Russia, like China, to weaken democracy from within. And we all have to wake up. There should be regulation. I'm not saying ban TikTok, but be more transparent, have some regulations. Government employees, soldiers are in Israel are walking around with TikTok, making photos, and they used it on October 7th.
So we're going to have to go to the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, who started to speak.
In the early morning hours, IDF managed to thwart a terrorist group. They came out, the terrorists, out of a chef 200 meters from the border. They were armed with RPGs. At 4 a.m., under very heavy fog, terrorists were identified by the watchers, who immediately called a Bedouin force. They came very close to the terrorists, and the terrorists started running away, and they were killed by drones and by tank fire. Within 5 minutes of the beginning of this terrorist event, 3 were killed, and the 4th terrorist ran into the Rafah area. Both the watchers and the soldiers managed to stop this event. They were very brave. Unfortunately, during this, Zaid Mazarid was killed. He was in the southern Gaza brigade, and we join the family, the bereaved family. Our hearts are with you. The Bedouin unit took part in the war and paid heavy prices as well. This is the story of the war. Muslims, Druze, Christians, and Jews of all parts of the Israeli society partake in the war, fighting for the common home of everybody. At the same time, IDF continue with their efforts in the Gaza area. We have attacked an area where Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists were hiding in an UNRWA school of Nuseirat in the center of Gaza. The terrorists acted from within the school, and there they planned and executed terrorist activities. Some also partook in the cruel massacre of October 7th. The IDF attacked very precisely 3 classrooms where the terrorists hid. We have identified some of the terrorists, and we are still we're still working on identifying the others. Some of those terrorists partook in the October 7th. We will persecute each and every person who was taking part on October 7th massacre. This morning, we have announced the death of First Sergeant Rafael Caudas, who fell in battle. I'd like to send my condolences from here to his family. We are very sorry for your very big loss. We're working and facing the drone threat of Hezbollah. We're improving our intelligence as we go along. In the last 24 hours, we have attacked in the southern of Lebanon various targets. In the past week, there were fires in the north area. No one can stay unmoved. The IDF is working in order to answer each and every event. First of all, save lives and prevent the fire from going into broader and broader areas. We are well prepared facing Hezbollah. In the Central Command, the Duvdevan unit stopped a Hamas terrorist who dealt with the production of bombs. There were fires between the 2 areas. The forces reacted with fire, and they managed to kill 3 terrorists, and they injured several others. There was also an attack from the air in order to protect our forces. The terrorist that was looked for was detained for investigation. This week, I have visited the Shiva of Dolev Yehud from the Nir Oz community. His sister Arbel is still held hostage in Gaza. What can one say to Dolev's family apart from asking for their forgiveness for what they have been through and what they are going through since October 7th until today, and to promise to the parents and to the widow and to the family and the entire community that we'll do our utmost in order to bring Arbel and the 123 hostages back home as quickly as possible. Questions? How is it possible that after 8 months we still see terrorist units who manage to go through the first obstacle, try to attempt entering the Israel area? And also in the north, how do we deal with this stepping up the scale with Hezbollah? How are we missing the targets? We are active in Rafah against the Hamas terrorism. Within this activity, I think the most important step is the Philadelphia axis, the Rafah corridor, managing to locate everything that's underground, all the tunnels that go into Egypt. This is the oxygen line of Hamas. We're now holding onto it and destroying it. Moreover, we're dealing with the underground that is used for terrorism. One of these tunnels is that very tunnel from which the terrorists came out of, and they reached very close to the border. Right now, our soldiers are mapping this tunnel. This is part of our effort to destroy all the infrastructure in Rafah. This shows that even under very heavy fog, we are ready, and the importance of the lookout soldiers that are working in very harsh conditions to see what is going on, to locate the soldiers and direct them and prevent a terrorist attack. I'd like to relate to what you said, the threat of the drones and what we have to answer. We have debriefed each and every such event. There is a threat very close to the border, very short range. It is a challenge, both in thwarting and identifying. We have shown that we can manage and deal with drones from large ranges in a very large quantity. In the attack that we were under, we managed to deal with a very big number of drones. None harmed the state of Israel. This is close to the border. We are on top of it. We will reach the operative solutions and provide a proper answer. I'd like you to relate to a criticism we have published. A senior officer says that the IDF does not coordinate their efforts. The state of fighting Rafah, which is marketed as a success, is not really one. The forces in the ground say that they lack ammunition, they lack clarity in their mission definition. We are in a war with multi-fronts. We're managing the fight with Hezbollah in the north. We are protecting our air space for 8 months now. Dealing with Hamas takes time. If somebody says something else, it's a mere illusion to the public. Rafah is one of the most complicated areas in the world, or in the Middle East for that matter. There were 4 million residents, and IDF managed to evacuate them all. This is unmatched. 1 million were evacuated. This is unmatched in the world. The importance of Rafah is crucial. This is the oxygen line of Hamas, and we have handled that. We are destroying the tunnels. We are destroying underground. Special units are acting inside most serious operation, and will expose it here in the media. We will do it when the time is right. We're handling the battalions of Hamas in Rafah, and this is happening, and it's good that it's happening in a most precise manner that is watching over the security of our forces and also the complexity of Rafah. We're also maintaining the ties with Egypt and our legitimacy in the world, and we will continue showing the world how we find all the solutions. For example, the operation tonight, where after 3 days of surveillance in a school of UNRWA, where there are people, but there are also 30 terrorists, and IDF finds the proper solution. He separates the people and the terrorists, locates those 3 classrooms, waiting for 3 days, and then with a very precise operation manages to kill terrorists only. A few words in English.
Well, we've just heard Daniel Hagari speaking exactly to the points you both were making about dealing with those drones.
I think it's astonishing because what you see here is IDF spokesperson between a rock and a hard place, between Israelis who are already impatient. They want the war.
They want answers.
They want to win the war. They want their security back. And the international community who doesn't get it, who just doesn't get what's going on here, and keeps complaining about how much we are doing targeted attack and very precision and trying to spare civilian lives in a unprecedented way, but still get criticism. So I just feel for Daniel Hagari.
30 seconds, Drew, I could give you.
I'm very unsatisfied to see our IDF soldiers apologizing for defending Israel. No, we have to attack and we have to destroy all these terrorists and to save our existence here. This is, and not to apologize all the time and to explain all the world, because the world has what I called intellectual laziness. They don't want to learn.
All right. Well, it is a fight on the military front and on the diplomatic front to some degree too, that he also.
Diplomatic will.